We are entering a time when ancient warnings are returning to make themselves heard with a force that can no longer be ignored. There is talk of 2 consecutive antipopes, of an apostasy that could strike at the very heart of the Church, and of disturbing signs already described in approved prophecies and by mystics who never failed to predict. Words that once seemed distant now coincide with what is happening before our eyes, as if heaven had decided to remove every veil. If you want to understand why so many believers speak of a point of no return, stay with us until the end. More and more believers are noticing that the Church is experiencing a different atmosphere than in the past, as if ordinary time had suddenly been surpassed. Questions that once concerned only theologians are now being discussed by everyone, a sign of a widespread perception. Something is moving at the top, precisely where one would expect solidity and clarity. The feeling is that of having crossed a boundary, as if a door had closed behind Christianity, forcing everyone to proceed into new and more restless territory. In this climate, ancient prophecies come to mind that spoke of spiritual disorientation and confusion coming from within, and not from external enemies. Messages long considered marginal now seem to describe the present uncertainty with surprising accuracy, as if the announced moment had finally arrived. Faith does not appear threatened by visible persecution, but by the slow weakening of certainties, a silent test that many recognize as particularly insidious. La Salette remains one of the most controversial apparitions recognized by the Church because its message lacks any diplomatic caution. It speaks openly of 2 corrupt popes, described in such brutal terms that they would be unbearable to many ecclesiastical ears. And it announces without hesitation that Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of the Antichrist. It is not surprising that the most sensitive parts of the text were removed from public view and sent in a sealed envelope to Rome, where they remained forgotten for over a century. Only in 1999 were they found by chance, restoring intact the weight of those words that no one had dared to erase, but that many had preferred not to remember. The strength of the message lies not only in the images, but in the fact that the apparition is considered worthy of belief, on a par with the great Marian sanctuaries. Reading such extreme words within an officially approved framework requires us to take them seriously, especially because they seem to describe not a simple pastoral crisis, but a spiritual collapse at the very top of the Church. For this reason, every time La Salette resurfaces, it does not do so as a relic of a distant past, but as a still open wound that questions the present. Alongside La Salette, another element that weighs heavily on the debate is the voice of the mystics, who confirm the same scenario with surprising precision. A stigmatist, informally recognized by her bishop in 1876, claimed that the Church would experience 2 consecutive antipopes and a period of months without a true pontiff, an interval defined as a void of leadership rather than a simple administrative vacancy. To this he added an even more disturbing detail. After those 2 antipopes, there would come a 3rd pope, a profoundly holy man, destined, however, to reign for a very short time before being called by God to his eternal reward. What is striking is not only the force with which this mystic announced such events, but the coherence of her words with the prophecies found at La Salette. The 2 antipopes, the doctrinal deviation, the disorientation of the faithful, the arrival of a very short-lived but saintly pope. Everything fits together without forcing, as if multiple voices were describing a single trajectory. The Church, from this perspective, appears as a body subjected to an extreme test, a painful transition in which visible authority seems to waver while a small remnant remains firm. This is why these revelations continue to emerge today with renewed power, not as spiritual curiosities, but as reflections of a climate that many perceive as already underway. The visions that speak of two papal figures do not belong to a single place or a single century. A blessed woman described with extraordinary clarity the image of two popes and a counterfeit church, a deceptive imitation destined to grow and attract heretics and men without faith, while the clergy became increasingly lukewarm and confused. He spoke of a spreading darkness, of closed churches, of persecuted believers, and of a plan to undermine St. Peter's Basilica itself, a plan conceived by a secret sect that is unequivocally identified in Catholic tradition. Even in that vision, however, a glimmer of salvation arrived at the last moment, when the Church was freed precisely at the moment of greatest anguish. The similarities with what was revealed at Fatima are striking. In the third secret, made public in the visual section, a pope is seen who appears to gaze at his own image as if there were a second mirrored pontiff, while leading a procession of clergymen toward martyrdom. The scene, set behind a city built on 7 hills, inevitably recalls Rome and suggests the possibility of a profound crisis in the very leadership of the Church. The two visions, therefore, do not limit themselves to describing external persecutions, but insist on the internal risk. An overlapping of authorities, an ambiguous leadership, a spiritual deception capable of seducing even those who should guard the faith. In both, a common thread emerges. The darkest moment coincides with the one preceding liberation, and the loyalty of a few becomes the only foothold amid the collapse of visible certainties. At the heart of the prophecies lies a warning that surpasses all others. It is not material punishments that frighten the saints, but apostasy within the Church, considered the most serious and painful sign of the final times. From Garabandal even came a counting of the popes linked to the end times and the announcement of a universal warning followed by a miracle, presented as the last chance for conversion before a more severe trial. Meanwhile, recent news reports have highlighted doctrinal tensions, scandals in sacred places, and doubts about the regularity of electoral processes, elements that many see as confirmation of those ancient revelations. The widespread feeling is that the Church is going through its own turmoil, between opposing forces and a visibly shaken authority. Yet, even in the most severe visions, the ending remains open to hope. A holy pope, destined to restore order after chaos, and a time of mercy granted before judgment. The message, ultimately, is simple. Prepare without panic, remain steadfast in faith, and recognize that purification, however painful, is always a prelude to rebirth. If you feel the need to rediscover the peace, beauty, and depth of authentic faith, let Gregorian chant accompany you. Visit Fides et Traditio. You'll find voices, prayers, and sounds that bring the heart back to the silence of God. Find the link in the description. What do you think? If you liked the video, comment Amen. God bless you.